Last week, OpenAI just released Sol 5.6, making it a more capable model than Claude's Fable 5. But yesterday, Claude just came out with Opus 5. Not only is it a cheaper model, but it's smarter and more capable than Fable 5. So today we're going to test out if Opus 5 is more capable than Sol 5.6. When testing between the two models, there's a few considerations that you want to take into account for. One of them being, overall cost and how much usage it's being used. So if you're using this for the API, cost really does come down to just even pennies. So like even if it's just a few cents cheaper, one actually might end up being more cost efficient, and even though that it might not be as capable. And another one is how much token usage they are using. So if you have a subscription and you want to be able to get as much usage out of each one as possible, and so while still being able to create things at the highest quality. So in terms of where I'm seeing things, like these models are just kind of across the benchmarks really similar. Opus 5 is coming up on top, but only by 3 points compared to like Sol's ChatGPT 5.6. And then in terms of cost, though, it can end up being that 5.6 is on the lower end. But if we actually look directly at the API costs right here, you can see that you have OpenAI Sol right here, and then you have Opus 5, and it's really just a $5 difference in terms of output. And so if we take a look, so the input of how many words you're actually typing on the keyboard, and then how much Claude or Opus is coding, how many tokens they're generating per. OpenAI is a little bit more expensive, and then Opus has that $5 difference. So that is one thing to really consider here, that $5 can actually add up over time, especially if you're doing anything, 12 million tokens per day, each month, that could be, hundreds of dollars. And so if we look at, Opus, the model itself, I think something that's really interesting is the fact that it is performing better than Fable 5, which was hyped up to be like, there was the government coming in and shutting it down for a week and causing all these problems. And now we're suddenly are not already seeing that. But what's really interesting is that in every aspect in terms of using it for agentic abilities, knowledge work, like asking it questions and stuff like that, it's coming out on top, and it's the cheaper model compared to 5. So really the only difference and the only thing that matters is ChatGPT Sol versus Fable 5, because Fable is just more expensive across the board. And in my own use cases, I've never actually seen it perform better than ChatGPT Sol. So that's kind of like the high level of what we're seeing with Opus 5, and that it is, on paper performing better than all the other models. But when it comes to actual practical use cases, what does that look like? And so the first thing that I tested this on was a design app. So I used the same prompt for both of them, create a visually beautiful single purpose design app called Type Bloom. And essentially the app is that you put in text and it creates a poster. And so if we look at these side by side, one thing I think is really interesting is that Claude only generated a HTML file, as ChatGPT Sol generated an entire workable app. Now, this does come down to leaving it open-ended, and I purposely did that. I wanted to see, I didn't tell Claude to add this onto a Vercel hosting environment. Like I didn't create any infrastructure within the prompt. I simply just said what I wanted the app to be. And I wanted to see what would happen. And so ChatGPT decided to make an entire app. And then at the end of it, it gave me a link to be able to explore the app as well. As for, Claude is 100% capable of doing that as well. I just didn't instruct it to. But because ChatGPT, OpenAI's Sol, has the ability to just create apps and then give you the link on the back end, it just does all the hosting infrastructure for you built into ChatGPT. So that is one thing to consider, is you don't have to think about using Cloudflare or Vercel. It's all just kind of built into the app. And so if you're just, one person that's looking to make apps really quickly, that could be a really solid selling point. But in terms of actually using the apps, how do they end up being? And so if we just hit, so this is Claude's output right here, Opus 5. So if we just hit surprise me, it just creates the poster, and then we can select the different types of, styles that we want. And I feel like it's a pretty good, solid looking poster, and then you can create, your own text as well. And we just hit generate poster. So like really like creative looking stuff. But if we go to ChatGPT's version and we hit surprise me, I think each poster is, interesting and unique, but it's just a template. Like it doesn't actually create, like if we look at Claude's version, like it's different every single time. But if we use Dreamlike on ChatGPT, it's just the same. Oh, it's just the same thing every single. No matter how many times I tell it to generate a new one, it doesn't create a new version. It just has the same version. So in terms of building out a design app, Opus 5 absolutely won on this one, mostly because it just has a more creative output on the actual design. And I think this is a really interesting case for Claude in general. Anytime I've used it for creative work, or whether that's like writing, design, I've noticed that Claude just tends to have a little bit better understanding of creative rules and kind of like creating things that's more interesting and unique. As for ChatGPT, it ends up becoming a little bit templated. And I have actually, we'll go to like the web design here and we can see, the real head-to-head difference between like ChatGPT and Claude in terms of like actual design. So if we go over to the website Claude made, again, Claude just did a single HTML file, as for ChatGPT created an entire web app that allows me to just like, I could just take that link and I can just give it to anyone. And I think that's a really useful sales case here. So we go to the website. So this is Opus 5's website built out. Not bad. It is clearly AI generated. Like these gradients and these backgrounds, are a very common trope that happens with design, and that can be fixed. I think it really ultimately does come down to the prompt that you have and then just iterating after that. But that's just like how you would actually design out a landing page. But I wanted to see, like, if I took this prompt right here, again, what happens without any extra instruction, anything, just like giving this to the model and seeing what it builds, how long it takes. And so it is detailed in that I wanted to make sure I was hitting certain elements, like I was having, just explaining how to design out the different cards and stuff like that, but it's the same prompt across the board. And so when it comes to Claude, I think it did a pretty good job, but ChatGPT did a way more refined job where it doesn't feel like the typical AI thing that I've been seeing, which I was really surprised by in terms of like looking at the type app. Like the end result of ChatGPT on the type app completely failed, I would say. I think Claude totally took that. But when it comes to the actual website, I feel like it has a more unique design. Like Claude doesn't, like if we go to this section, same two sections, how it works. ChatGPT built out these little illustrations. Claude almost was lazier in the sense of like it didn't build out the illustrations. Now this does save tokens, but at what cost? Like this is the website I would prefer to have showcasing my app because it just has more details. It doesn't look as AI generated, and it comes with that extra link right here where you can just start giving it to people and start just like essentially within like 10 to 15 minutes, you have an up and running website. So in terms of actual web design, I'm going to absolutely give this to ChatGPT. Okay, and then for the game, again, Claude just created a single HTML file. As for ChatGPT Soul, it gave me a link that I can share. In terms of actual usability, so this is what Claude built. It actually has sound effects. I would say the app is relatively fun, like for just a very simple prompt, just like essentially like taking like simple, funny physics-based game that like uses a launcher and from the bottom left corner. If we go to the ChatGPT version, it's almost it's unplayable. Like it added these like rubber bands that makes it so that you can't launch it any further than what you're supposed to. You can't collect any stars. It has a very similar look between the two, although I would say Claude has a more refined aesthetic here. As for the ChatGPT version, like I literally cannot play the game, but for the Claude version, like I can actually try to collect stars. I can go and hit reset. Same thing on the ChatGPT, hit reset. But you can actually play the game. As for ChatGPT, you can't. So, and one thing that is very clear between both models is that it is not good at game design. Like I cannot technically win this game no matter how hard I try, like this doesn't bounce any higher than to allow me to collect all the stars. Like if this was an Angry Birds version, like there would be a way to be able to collect all the stars in like 1 or 2 goes. So like in terms of game design, AI totally failed here. But in terms of like which game is better is 100% Claude, because you can actually play it. So for the game, I would definitely say Opus 5 won on this one. And then for the final build, I built out a Chrome extension. I think these are really useful. They're really easy to make for AI. So I went ahead and created a really simple Chrome extension. And essentially what it is it just takes a link that is really long and removes all the end results and then gives you like the finalized version here so that you can just, copy the link and paste it in instead of having this long link. So in terms of Claude versus ChatGPT here, I like the ChatGPT version just because it feels like a more simple experience. In the prompt, I made sure to say that it was very simple, it was solving a frustrating problem that people have, and that the end result is just like one click, it works. And so for the Claude version, it added, it told you how many things it removed here. It doesn't have this cleaned version. I think that's just like a small nitpick, but like in terms of like simplicity, like ChatGPT didn't include that, and I don't care about those things. Like this is removing that. And so I think ChatGPT kind of picked up on that and made it the more simple experience. So for the actual Chrome extension build, I would give it to ChatGPT. Now, in terms of like, this looks like it would be a tie. So like Opus did better at the app design, ChatGPT did better at the web design, and just across the board, they're all just like even. But what is it like to actually, work with these AI models? And I think one thing that ChatGPT just does better is the experience of using it. Like, so if we just go ahead and compare like the terminals, Claude is on the left and ChatGPT is on the right. As you can see, both get the same prompt. And so when ChatGPT talks to you, it does it in a really like simple, refined manner. Like it just says, here's the link, here's what I made. As for Claude, it does like this long, wordy sentences, often repeating itself, where it would say, I built this app and this is how I built the app, and then the app is built. It's like in 1 or 2 sentences, it could say something that ChatGPT says in like 2 or 3 words. And so when building with apps, like you want things to be as efficient as possible. And I think ChatGPT does a really good job at telling you exactly everything that it did in the less amount of words as possible. As for Claude, I constantly have to say, like, tell me less words. Like, it doesn't matter. And like, that is just like the same experience across the board. No matter which app you use, like Claude just continues to give you more words. So I really like using ChatGPT when building because it feels like it's a more efficient, less fluff output. So in terms of like working with it, I definitely would prefer using Soul over Opus. Now, for everyday tasks, on the other hand, I think doing things like writing, researching, designing things out, I think Opus does a better job at this simply because it ends up being a little bit more creative and it has more of an understanding of like human taste than what I think Soul does. So I tried this just doing like a simple research test on how many U.S. states have passed laws regulating the use of AI in hiring decisions. And so this was the output that ChatGPT gave me. I think it gave a really nice like table format, which you can ask for. I didn't ask for, but it just gave it to me. As for Claude, this is the output that it had given me. I mean, it gave me everything I asked. It did the research. And so I kind of did like a reverse 180 and I asked ChatGPT to look at the output of Claude and check to see if it was correct. And then I did the same thing, but on ChatGPT, and both of them like found issues and problems with it. And so like, in terms of like actually researching things, I think both did a really good job. It's a common problem no matter which model you're using. If it's going to be factual or not, you can still influence them. You can ask them like, hey, are you sure about that? And it's going to self-correct itself, even though it probably shouldn't be doing that. So that's just a common problem across the board with these. But in terms of researching things, I think ChatGPT ended up giving a lot more than what you actually need. As for Claude, it was pretty much straight to the point, and it just said, hey, like, these are the facts and this is what I'm telling you. So, which is kind of interesting because I think when working with ChatGPT, it uses less words, but when working with research with ChatGPT, it uses more words. And so these are the differences in terms of how it worked. So ChatGPT searched 26 different websites. As for Claude, it looks like it used... And so if we look at the back end between the two AI models, so this is what ChatGPT did. It searched over 200 different sources across, I guess, 26 different websites. So it's looking at the website and then looking at, different ones. And so, but for Claude, it actually ended up only searching 48 different sources from what I can count here in the results. And so I think ChatGPT seems to just have done a more thorough evaluation of actually, going through and checking its work. But one thing is like, no matter what anytime you're using these AI models for research, you just want to make sure that you're asking it to directly cite and source verifiable resources, because it will check a website and then oftentimes it will probably just read like the headline or like the first paragraph and then we'll move on to the next one. So you need to make sure that it's like directly looking at things versus like just kind of going willy-nilly. But in terms of like a simple, one prompt, it looks like ChatGPT just ended up doing more. And so in terms of like broader research, I think ChatGPT is the better one. But in terms of like output for like looking and just doing a simple research task, I think Claude does a really good job. So overall, I would probably just use ChatGPT because it does a more thorough job for research. I'm going to give it to ChatGPT. Now, the experiences of the desktop apps, this isn't like more so the actual models themselves, so more of just like, what is it like to have a quality of life features, which app is a little bit better. And I think they're both very, very similar. I've used the Codex app more just because I like the UI and kind of like how they organize by projects. It took me a second to figure out that you can add projects. You just have to right click and then do add to group. Both of them have a built-in browser. You're going to want to use the built-in browser more than your actual, like you can get the Chrome extension to have ChatGPT or Claude use your browser directly, but I don't like doing that because it has access to banks, financials, my Gmail and stuff like that. But if you're just using the built-in app, it's its own standalone version. It's not going to access any of your own personal data. So I typically think I just use the built-in browser here, and I think it works. Both of them work really well. There isn't like a real difference other than I would say, overall style. So, I mean, like in terms of like actual app, I would just say both of them are great and there's no like bad or good experience between the two, just because they are basically the same app with just different looks. So I would say that Opus 5 is the winner here, just because for everyone in general, if you're a more deep focused dev that wants to like just be more into the code side of things, I think Sol's a good option. But as a really roundabout model, like Opus 5 really gives Sol a runabout for its money, and it has just better connectivity. Like it ends up having more features. You have the ability within the terminal to just go, / remote control, and then you can just instantly start working on that session on your phone. As for Codex, you can't do that in the terminal. You have to go to the app. You have to be able to do it. So Claude just keeps on coming out with more features. And so like in terms of like using Claude as an investment, like it just is becoming the more feature-rich model. As for Sol, may use less usage, may be easier to work with, but just has some things that you kind of have to like work around with, like the remote ability and stuff like that. So in terms of like using Claude or Opus, so which model would I give, $200, $100 for a subscription? If I had to pick one, it would be Opus, just because it's a really capable model and it's coming out with all those features consistently. I mean, they're probably releasing one new feature like every 1 to 2 weeks. As for ChatGPT, they like to take their time and kind of like make sure, it's like Apple, like they want to make sure that they're doing it right. But Opus, Claude, that is what I would do.